On Sunday the 14th of January, just last month, a 25-year-old mother named Marissa Carmichael would phone the police after having her belongings stolen by an unknown man and being left stranded at a gas station. However, by the time they arrived on the scene, around 40 minutes later, she was nowhere to be found. It was mentioned by an eyewitness that they saw the young woman getting into a car with a random stranger sometime after the phone call, but after checking surveillance footage, the police were unable to trace the vehicle. Marissa was then reported missing by her family after she failed to return home the next day, and so the official search began, with the police starting at the club she had been attending that night. However, after 3 weeks of investigation, the young mother of 5 still remains missing to this day, which has understandably led many to wonder, what really happened to Marissa Carmichael, and could she be North Carolina's next victim of human trafficking? Marissa Carmichael was born in 1998 to her loving mother Sarah in the city of High Point, North Carolina, where she grew up alongside her sister Emma. Little was known about her younger years, but as she moved into adolescence, her high energy and mischievous spirit would begin to show, as Marissa would quickly become the life of the party, with her close friends always expressing how kind and generous of a person she was. But her popularity certainly didn't only pertain to her female friendships, as Marissa was also very popular with the boys, given her warm personality and one-of-a-kind smile. And so, it didn't come as too much of a surprise when during her teenage years she would eventually fall pregnant with her first child. Now, for any young mother, you could imagine this would be quite a difficult transition period. However, to the contrary, it would seem that Marissa was a natural, and she would immediately fall in love with her new role as a mother and planned to build an even bigger family. So, her next child then followed around a year later, and with this new challenge, once again, Marissa took it in her stride, and unsurprisingly, she was quickly looking forward to having another, which is exactly what she did. 3 more times, in fact. And so, at the very young age of just 25 years old, Marissa would become a mother to 5 children who she was utterly devoted to. But despite her love for her children, this didn't mean that Marissa didn't have her own life too. And as a 25-year-old woman with her high energy and love of clubbing, she wasn't unknown to spend a night out from time to time while her family looked after the kids. And given the stresses of being a mother of 5, you can certainly see why she would need to blow off some steam on occasion. However, it would be during one of these rare nights out that Marissa would suddenly find herself in an incredibly dangerous situation on that fateful day in January. On Saturday the 13th of January, the young woman had planned a night out with her friends in the neighbouring town of Greensboro, which was located around 30 minutes from her home, so she had understandably booked an Airbnb for the trip before eventually saying goodbye to her kids as she left for the weekend. After arriving, it is unknown how many different places the group visited. However, friends would later claim that they spent some time in the 117 Sofa Bar and Lounge towards the later hours of the night, and then into the early hours of Sunday morning. By all accounts, the group were having a good time and enjoying themselves, when they would suddenly notice Marissa talking to a man at the bar at around 3 AM. But given Marissa's flirty nature, this certainly wasn't an uncommon occurrence, so her friends weren't too concerned and left her to the conversation, keeping an eye out from time to time. However, despite their surveillance, it wouldn't be long before the pair would eventually leave the club together hand in hand, before getting into the man's vehicle, which was parked somewhere outside. They then waited in the car for an unknown amount of time and eventually peeled off, driving east along Market Street towards the neighbourhood of Cumberland. But it would seem that the pair would eventually get into a heated argument whilst inside the car, as the driver would then abruptly pull up outside an Exxon gas station and demanded that Marissa get out, leaving her stranded without her purse or cell phone. So, frightened and panic-stricken, Marissa then ran into the gas station and asked the employee if she could use a phone to call the police, as outside of being stranded and alone in a strange and unknown town, she had also just had her purse and cell phone stolen by a man from the club, and therefore a crime had taken place and needed to be dealt with. The police then answered her call and took down all of the information before asking Marissa to stay where she was while they sent officers out to take her statement in person and make sure she was okay, to which Marissa agreed before handing the phone back to the gas station employee. But after around 10 minutes soon went by with the police still not arriving on the scene, Marissa started to get paranoid, and her panic only grew as the reality of her situation continued to sink in. After all, she was all alone without her cell phone, and her home was around 20 miles away in High Point. So concerned she may not be able to get home with her kids, she struck up a conversation with a man in the store. It is unknown how long they spoke for or what the topic of conversation was, but at some point during their talk, Marissa would suddenly agree to get into a car with this man, and then they left the gas station together before the police could arrive. But little did she know that this would be the last time anybody would see her. On Sunday the 14th of January, the Greensboro police would receive a call from a woman named Sarah Carmichael, who was claiming that her daughter was not answering her phone and was very likely in great danger. Well, as you can imagine, once the name of her daughter was provided, it was quickly identified that the person in question was the very same individual that had called them at 3:45 a.m. earlier that morning to report a robbery, but had then strangely left the scene before they could question her. According to Sarah, a friend of Marissa's had called her at 5 a.m. saying there was an emergency, before the line suddenly disconnected. But even more chilling, Sarah then attempted to call her daughter numerous times to try and find out if she was okay, but to her shock, an unidentified man kept answering the phone to explain that she had gone to the store. It was then revealed by the police that earlier on that night at around 4:30 a.m, officers had arrived at the gas station where they then spoke to the staff about the situation. However, given that Marissa was seen to be getting into a car with somebody, it was presumed that she was likely getting a ride home with a friend. So rather than following up at the time, they just took a statement from the witnesses and then left the scene, not thinking too much of it. But given the concerns raised by Marissa's mother, the police then agreed to send their officers back out to the area that afternoon to do some further investigating, in the hopes that they would be able to find the young woman and confirm her safety before it was too late. Soon enough, they then arrived at 117 Sofa Bar and Lounge, where Marissa was supposedly last seen by her friends, and the police then started questioning the bar staff to see if they could provide any useful evidence. They also checked surveillance footage from that night to see if they could identify the man she had left with, but unfortunately, despite finding Marissa on the cameras, they were unable to identify the suspect she was with, and the staff were also incapable of providing any further leads for the police to utilise in the case. So with little else to uncover at the scene, the officers then returned back to their office to spread the message of Marissa's strange disappearance with neighbouring police departments, and contacted Sarah Carmichael to let her know what they had been able to find. But unbeknownst to the on-duty police officers, what they would soon discover would take this relatively common case of robbery to a whole new level of concern. On Wednesday the 17th of January, a mysterious call was made to the Greensboro Police Department with an interesting tip relating to the case, as according to the caller, the man that Marissa was seen getting into a car with that night at the gas station was actually a known criminal who went by the name of Sean. So given this massive break in the case, the police immediately set out to find this man with the hope that he would then lead them to Marissa, and soon enough, they found him. Upon interrogation, Sean claimed that after picking up Marissa from the gas station, they then drove around together for 30 minutes before he gave her some cash and then dropped her off at an apartment complex. Well, somewhat confused by the statement, the police then asked why he dropped her off at an apartment complex as opposed to the Airbnb she was apparently staying at. But in response, Sean couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation, causing the police to instantly become suspicious of the man. However, as they had no physical proof that he was involved in her disappearance, they were unfortunately forced to let him go, but very much intended to keep their eye on him going forward. As the days went by, Marissa's family continued to spread awareness of the case by handing out flyers to local residents in Greensboro and asking if anybody had seen her. But despite their efforts, it would seem that nobody was talking, leaving the family desperate for answers. But what would happen next would once again shine a light on the number one suspect, as according to some witnesses, Sean was actually seen taking down missing person flyers of Marissa, implying that he didn't want anybody looking for her for some reason, and in doing so, further embedding the suspicion that was already around him. Also, to add to the controversy, it was later revealed that the Airbnb Marissa was supposedly staying at was severely unsafe, as a person staying at the same building at the same time would actually call the police to report an incident. The operator asked what was happening there, and according to the witness, they had seen what appeared to be young girls taking illegal substances alongside much older men, which understandably caused the police to send out officers to the address. However, just as before, it would seem nothing would come of this lead, as there were no arrests or statements taken, and therefore no evidence was provided that may have assisted the authorities in their search for Marissa. Now, unfortunately, this is all we know about the case, for now, but the Greensboro Police Department did recently come out with a statement a few days ago to reveal that they are still working on the case and are urging the local community to come forward with any useful information. So hopefully it will only be a matter of time before she is finally found and brought home to her children. However, with Marissa now being officially missing for over 3 weeks, the probability of her safe return is growing more and more unlikely as the days pass. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, given the details surrounding this case, I'm sure you will agree that there is one particular theory here that stands out amongst the rest, which would of course be that Marissa was kidnapped by this Sean character, who has been extremely suspicious ever since the incident took place. The obvious chain of events that could have played out here is that the man Marissa was seen speaking to at the bar could have been connected to Sean, and so after leaving Marissa stranded at the gas station, knowing she was alone and without her cell phone, the driver then called Sean to come and pick her up. Now, there's no way of knowing if this was the case, but it is certainly suspicious that Marissa would willingly get in a car with a stranger, unless she knew that this man would be the only way she would get her cell phone and purse back. Perhaps Sean identified himself as an acquaintance of the driver who robbed her, and promised to give her belongings back if she got inside. I know this may sound incredibly dangerous, but it would be an understatement to say that Marissa was in any way in her right mind that night. Just listen to the 911 call and you can immediately tell she was under the influence of something strong.
Guilford Metro 911, what's the address of your emergency?
Yes, ma'am, I needed the contact to the non-emergency number.
It comes into the same center. I can try to help you while I have you on the phone, and I can give you the number
Okay,
for
yes,
future use.
I don't know where I am in Greensboro. I just got all my stuff throughout the car. He took off with my phone. I have no clue where I'm at. I have no numbers, nothing.
Are you at a business?
I am at a store, yes. I'm at a Synergy.
Are you at an Exxon?
Is this Exxon?
801 East Market?
So perhaps this also affected her decision-making skills, leading her into this incredibly dangerous situation. Once in the car though, it's impossible to say what could have happened to the young mother, but it's very possible that she was then taken somewhere against her will, where she remains to this day. But despite the rather bleak conclusions that could be drawn here, that doesn't mean we can't keep a sense of optimism that Marissa may be returned home eventually. After all, it's still possible she could be alive out there somewhere, held up in a house, just waiting until the day she's released. Or maybe she's even choosing to stay hidden for the time being, as she's making good money wherever she is. But either way, at this point we can only speculate on her safety, and therefore until we know for sure that she's alive and well, we have to keep searching for answers. However, if she was in fact kidnapped by this man, what would have been the purpose? Well, unfortunately, there are only two realistic answers to this question, which I'm sure many of you have already guessed. But to be brutally honest, it would seem that Marissa has either been forced into silence for speaking to the police, or she's been forced into some kind of human trafficking scheme, where her life is now in the hands of her captors. To be completely transparent, I truly hate theorizing these types of cases because I always like to have a potential light at the end of the tunnel. But for Marissa, it's very difficult to envisage a conclusion here that ends well. From the evidence provided by the police and her friends and family, it would seem that Marissa was drugged by these men, who then took advantage of her given the fact she was alone in a town with no belongings. Now, whether or not the two men involved in the case are connected is not known, but it would seem that their behaviour was incredibly suspicious, and therefore we have to keep an open mind that they may be responsible for her disappearance. According to the state government, North Carolina is among the most affected states for human trafficking, ranking 9th in the whole country. This is due to having major interstate highways, a large military population, numerous rural agricultural areas with a high demand for cheap labour, and an increasing number of gangs, which all contribute to making it a hotbed for human trafficking. So given these statistics, alongside the concerning details surrounding this case, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that Marissa has more than likely become North Carolina's next victim of human trafficking. But before we jump to any conclusions here, I feel we have to ask the question, are there any other possible theories that are worth exploring? Well, one piece of evidence provided by Marissa's very own mother, Sarah Carmichael, was that according to her, the police never even showed up to the gas station the night Marissa made that 911 call. Could the police be involved in a cover-up of sorts? Well, there isn't much more to add to this theory other than hearsay, so it's difficult to comment. However, I wouldn't rule it out as a possibility. But even more suspiciously, it has recently come out that Marissa actually attempted to get in touch with her mother from Sean's phone the night she disappeared at around 4:30 am. But as Sarah was sleeping at the time, Marissa instead called her father, who did answer, and she told him it was an emergency, asking to speak to her friend who was at the bar with her that night and had been staying at their home at the time. The father then went upstairs to speak to this friend, who by now was already asleep in Marissa's bed, the very same friend that was supposedly out in Greensboro with her that weekend. And then he asked her what was going on, but it would seem that the friend was completely unaware of where Marissa was, and therefore was unable to provide any useful information at the time. Now, I'll be honest, I probably should have included this evidence during the earlier portion of the video, but these details have only just come to light, and I'm really not sure how accurate they actually are, especially given the misinformation that is easily spread on the internet nowadays. But if these statements are true, this would certainly bring the integrity of this friend into question, and in my opinion, would automatically involve her as a suspect in the case. Of course, I'm not claiming anything specific, and I have no evidence to back up this theory, but could the friend have conspired the disappearance alongside the men that were responsible for kidnapping Marissa? Well, it's certainly possible, and given that this friend was supposedly with Marissa that night and didn't even think to check up on her before going to sleep, this screams guilty to me. Also, you would think these two girls would have had to have been extremely close for her to be comfortable enough to sleep in Marissa's bed where her parents live, so I'd imagine she was supposed to be a trustworthy person. But how could she ever be comfortable enough to go back to the High Point residence and leave her friend in Greensboro, knowing that she didn't know anybody else there? Well, before I get carried away once again, I suppose it is possible that this friend may have been covering for Marissa. Also, I don't know how many other friends were there at the time, so perhaps she felt she was in safe hands. Or on the other hand, perhaps she knew what was happening and didn't want to reveal the truth to Marissa's parents as it would get her in trouble. Maybe Marissa had instructed her friend that she should go home and look after the kids so she could take care of business in Greensboro. I have no evidence to prove this, of course, but it would certainly explain why somebody so close to Marissa would lie to her parents. But if this is the case, what would be the reason for Marissa to just abandon her life? Well, before I attempt to answer this question, I think it would be useful to speak for a moment on a very similar case that involves another young mother that left a bar with a strange man, never to be seen again. The missing person case of Deundrea Ford burst onto the scene towards the end of last year, when it became known to the public that a 21-year-old mother from Texas had gone missing after being involved in a murder trial where she was set to be a witness in the coming weeks. It was discussed by many that she had been taken as a means of being silenced by preventing her from testifying, but just a few weeks ago it was announced that she had actually been murdered by a local man for a completely unrelated reason. Now, this story is clearly tragic, and if you would like more information, I highly suggest checking out the video on screen now, as I go into a lot more detail about the case. But taking a step back, and why I believe this case relates to Marissa Carmichael, is that Deundrea was also a young black mother who had left a bar late at night with a random stranger. Now, it was relatively well known that Deundrea was a dancer and had dabbled in escorting in the past, so many believed that she had just got into the van with the aim of earning some money. But unfortunately, regardless of why she left with this man, she was never seen again. Now, I truly hope the same fate doesn't meet Marissa, but given these similar details in their stories, mixed with the concerning 911 phone call and Marissa's later phone calls claiming there was an emergency, it would seem that there is a good chance that her case may end up in a similar way. The man she was last seen with did state he had given her some money before dropping her off, so it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say he was paying for a service of some kind. Therefore, you could argue that this case could be a simple result of poor decision making, but equally, it's still very possible that Marissa was simply drugged that night, which would also explain her strange behaviour, and this Sean character could very well be lying in his statement. But either way, until the police reveal more information about the case, we are unfortunately only left to speculate and to continue spreading awareness of Marissa's case, in the hopes that we can one day find the answers, and in doing so, provide some much needed closure for her family. Now, just before I end the video, I'd like to take a moment to shout out a fellow creator who goes by the name Heba Chai, as a lot of the information used in this story I was actually able to collect from her diligent research, so please make sure to check out her channel if you want more details on the case. Also, make sure to check out the GoFundMe page, which was recently set up by Marissa's mother, Sarah Carmichael, as they are still over $9,000 short of their $10,000 target, and they are hoping to use the funds for a private investigator, so any money you can spare will hopefully be going to a good cause. But anyway, on that note, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any other theories of your own that may help explain what really happened to Marissa Carmichael, please leave your comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you would like to hear more about some of the other cases that I featured in this video, such as Deundrea Ford, feel free to check out the playlist on screen now.